does everyone know a little bit about FAIRshake? Or any raise of hands? I don't know anything about FAIRshake. One.
There were three.
Okay. Well, real quick, FAIRshake is just trying to essentially find digital objects and kind of in some way evaluate them for fairness, which is what I guess this entire thing is about. Everything being fair. So, but we want to evaluate it. So the current project and many projects, in fact, have this type of workflow. You have a primary code base, and then you perform some sort of documentation generation. So you have maybe a Swagger API out of that. So then you can register it with Smart API, and boom, you're interoperable, right? Everyone can take your API. They can use code generation tools that Swagger came up with, and then they can access your API via a programmatic client, or they can re-implement your API. This is good, but we're kind of trying a different approach, and we're trying to do this backwards. Why do we want to do it backwards? Well, you can, with this approach, generate code, but if you change the API just a little bit, you have to regenerate the code, and then it's kind of hard to merge. So if we do it this way, we put the API first. By doing this, other tools can use the FAIRshake API as intended. The primary code base is just an implementation of that API, and other tools can, in fact, extend FAIRshake API itself. The way this works is basically the primary code base doesn't really interact with itself in the typical fashion. Instead, it goes through the middleman, the interface. So this is kind of called inversion of control in the computer science world, and we're doing this on the API level. And what this basically allows us to do is separate our FAIRshake app into three major components, which is the new APIs we're designing, the assessment, a rubric, and a score. Each of these abstractions of components interact with each other's abstractions rather than the concretions. The benefit of that is any such score, for instance, this insignia we've created here, which is really an aggregate of assessments that people contributed. This doesn't really have to know anything about what type of questions were under the model, nor does it have to care about how those assessments were generated, whether they were self-evaluated, external users' evaluations, or automatically evaluated. Similarly, these assessments can in fact use arbitrary types of questions without having to implement their own questions. This, offers nice versatility that basically is going to make the tool a lot more modular and interoperable. These other APIs that already exist, we basically are taking the Swagger, and which kind of operates as an interface so that these can really depend on some of these existing APIs to do things that we don't necessarily want to re-implement. For instance, data as a service or GUIDs, right? We can actually just assign scores to specific globally unique identifiers, right? And we don't have to store the metadata ourselves. We can request it from other services. So this is basically what it looks at an overview, and that's the FAIRshake web interacts with all these APIs, but similarly the data producer can interact with these APIs. FAIR governance can come up with questions. FAIR developers can develop automated assessments or new types of ways of visualizing the data. And everything can happen kind of in parallel, and it all fits together. So that's basically the goal, and that's all I have. Any questions?